On this week's Prequel episode, we follow up on our Divergent listener polls and preview James and the Giant Peach. Hello and welcome back to This Film Is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. We have a lot of listener feedback. We got some previewing to do for James and the Giant Peach. But before we get to all of that, we're going to do our patron shoutouts.
I put up with you because your father and mother were our finest patrons, that's why.
No new patrons this week, but we do have our Academy Award-winning top patrons, and they are Vic Dangerously, Matilde, Steve from Arizona, Paul, Jeff Niederhofer, Teresa Schwartz, Ian from Wine Country, Winchester's Forever, Kelly Napier, Gray Hightower, Gratch, Just Gratch, Shelby Says Pay Writers, That Darn Skag, V Frank, and Alina Starkov. Thank you all very much for continuing to support us at the Academy Award-winning level. And we here at This Film Is Lit co-signed Shelby's name this week. Pay the writers. If you're not aware, the Writing Guild out in Hollyweird is, I don't know, is striking currently, along with, I think some other unions joined them recently. I can't recall. For better pay, for reasonable pay. And yes, we have not talked about it here really because there's not a whole lot to talk about other than, support unions, support the writers union. They,
deserve to be paid for
pay
what
the
they
writers.
do.
There you go. It's pretty straightforward. All right. We have lots of feedback for our first installment of the 2023 summer series, Divergent. So let's get into that now.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
On Patreon, we had 1 vote for the book, 1 for the movie, and 2 listeners who couldn't decide. A handful of fishbones said, "Woof, I made it about 70% through the book and 70% through the movie. With peace and love, I think that's all I can take. I'll probably have more fun just listening to y'all talk about it. It would have been more interesting if the faction system was less like a series of interlocking cults of people and more like an ant colony where jobs would be genetically decided."
That's Brave New World, is it not?
That's part of Brave New World. A person would be less a person and more a function within society. And that's basically the thesis of Brave New World.
Yeah, and that is what they're at least to some extent, what Veronica Roth is going for here.
A little bit. Yeah. If she made the system and the people more rigid and less human, then the humanity of a divergent of nonconformity would be in greater contrast. As it is, the system fundamentally doesn't make sense because everyone feels like a normal, multifaceted person. Maybe that's the point?
See, this is so interesting because I agree that's the point, but this next sentences also are very compelling and make me question the point of the book. Anyways, continue.
Yeah. That rigid systems are stupid and you should just let people live. But then what's a divergent?
Yes, that's...
Why have their brains be different?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think...
That's the part that really makes it weird.
And I think that is... And, I'll withhold, a lot of judgment until we read the other 2 installments in the series, because we don't really know where she's going with this.
This is true, yeah.
I have no idea. You have no idea.
No idea.
But it does seem like the thesis is a bit muddled.
Yes.
Because it feels like the point... the overall point that she's making is that people are multifaceted and they all have a little bit of all of these different
and this
qualities.
Class system is dumb.
Yeah, and this system is dumb, and it's not a good idea for us to pigeonhole ourselves in singular things. But then why have
divergent people who are labeled as such? Shouldn't everybody be divergent?
Wouldn't everybody be divergent, at least in some degree? And
maybe that is the twist reveal.
Maybe.
But it's not possible. It doesn't seem possible because I actually wondered that if maybe somehow literally everybody is divergent, but they just don't. But they wouldn't, and maybe some people don't tell them. I don't know. Because, it does seem the book and movies seem to imply that people who are divergent have some sort of different, literally different physical makeup.
Yeah.
Because it makes them somehow immune to the simulation drugs
Yeah.
that they're using in this universe. So it's not just like a weird classification, or like it's not a superficial difference that these people are somehow aware that they don't fit into these groups. It's also that there is literally physically something different
Yes.
about these people, which that then feels weird, because it does feel like the point of the book should be these class systems don't make sense. This is a stupid system. Like, that seems like what the point should be. But then when you introduce the Divergent into that, it makes it very confusing at what the actual point is. If there are people who defy these classes, then do some people actually do fit into these class systems? And it is good for some people?
That would be what the existence of Divergence seems to imply,
yes.
That most people do, in fact, fit into this caste system.
Which is very strange if that's the point. But again, we don't know, and it's hard to say now without being further in the series. We will obviously revisit this as we continue through the series.
I guess we'll find out. I hope we find out, and the next 2 books don't just like completely go off a cliff. But who knows?
Don't completely diverge. Yeah.
Yeah. A handful of Fishbones went on to say, "Everything is too messy. Send it back for edits. Please try again." Anyway, I give it to the book. Watching the silly stuff play out on screen was too much for me. In the book, I can at least play pretend and warp things to be more digestible. But on a more positive note, I am hype for James and the Giant Peach.
Sweet. Well, that's exciting. We're glad about that. Yeah, I mean, we struggled both ways. It really, the thing that pushed it over for me, and I think Katie too, was just the movie secularizing the story. was a big factor in why we chose the movie, and it's shorter and more digestible than reading the whole book. When we don't really like either, sometimes the movie can be better just by the nature of it being shorter, which I think some comments are going to mention as we continue through here. So
our next comment was from Matilde, who said, "I agree with most of what you guys said, but in the end, I can't say which one I preferred. I haven't read a lot of YA books, but to me, this one was fine. Nothing more, but nothing less either."
I will say this. I've read a lot of YA, and probably, or not a lot. I've read an okay amount of YA. I enjoy the genre a lot. I grew up reading it. I continue to read it, whatever. Not like I read it all the time, but it is, if I want to read something for fun, not for the show, I will very often read something that probably falls into YA, at least to some extent.
It's pretty digestible when you're looking for something just for like fun.
For fun,
and to have like a nice time.
Generally it's just an enjoyable thing, and there's something to be said for challenging yourself with reading and stuff. But again, we do the podcast where we read other stuff and whatever. Recreationally reading, I often will go to YA. That being said, there's a lot better YA out there than, this isn't even in the top 50% of YA I've read. Not even close. So
No, I've read a fair bit of YA as well, and I mean, I tend to gravitate more towards either fantasy or like realism over like the sci-fi.
YA.
I
like all of it,
but
I don't really care. But
but this is
it's not particularly
great.
No.
Matilde went on to say, "Same goes for the movie. As a PG-13 action flick, it's okay. As an adaptation, it has its highs and lows. On the plus side for the book, I liked the ruthlessness of the initiation. It was way more fitting than what we got in the movie. I also preferred the characterization in the book, even if there could have been more. Tobias's in particular. I liked his fragility in the book. It was cliche, the love interest with a tormented past, but not as bad as I've seen. Overall, it's an intriguing concept that needs a lot of editing and revising for sure, but still, it kept me interested."
I will say I agree with that. Like, it's also not the worst YA you've ever read. Like,
I've read far worse.
It did keep me interested. I wasn't disinterested in the story. It just, a lot of the pieces didn't add up in a way that was satisfying for me. But it wasn't like I was horribly bored reading it necessarily.
See, I don't know if I was interested in it as much as I was just like trying to figure out what was going on and like continuing to read hoping that I would get answers at some point.
Yeah, which is a type of interest. Obviously, it's not the best form of, of a book holding your interest, for sure. It's not the platonic ideal of a book holding your interest, but there's at least something.
I think there's
there.
A subtle difference, though, in like you're interested in reading to find out what happens because the story is like grabbing you, and reading to find out what happens because you don't know what the fuck is going on.
Yes, no, I don't think it's a subtle difference. I think that's a huge difference. My point is, that was what I was saying, is that it's not the platonic ideal of keeping your interest, but it's still better than a story that you truly do not care about in any way.
Yeah, I guess
I would
so.
argue, and it's just like a boring slog to get through. 50 Shades had that at times for me,
Yeah.
where, like comparing it to something like that, obviously it's a different genre, but like.
But I mean, that is a good point. I truly did not care most of the time I could have put it down at any time.
Yeah, and like, there was occasionally something, like very rarely I'd be like, well, I'm interested to see where this goes, but like very rarely.
Yeah.
And so much of it was just a slog to get through, whereas I didn't feel like this was a slog to get through. It just also wasn't particularly engaging for me. I guess is kind of where I would land.
For me, it was almost not quite a hate read. But there was more of like when we read The Hunger Games, I kept reading because I was like, oh my God, what's going to happen?
Yes, yeah.
But like with this, it was like, when will they tell me what's happening?
Right. Yes. No, like I said, I agree. It's just, it's definitely. And honestly, I wasn't quite in that regard. I wasn't quite that far down. I was moderately interested in where the story was going and stuff. It's no Hunger Games, which isn't even, the peak, I would argue, of the genre. But even, and the Hunger Games is quite good, as we talked about a lot last year. But I like 2 years.
2 years ago?
2 years ago.
Yeah.
Like the Hunger Games a lot, but I guess for me, it wasn't quite as, I didn't have quite as rough of a time with it as you did. I just didn't particularly like it that much.
Mathilde went on to say, I just took it for what it was and didn't dissect the structure. In my experience, most dystopian concepts don't hold up to tough scrutiny anyway. The movie did a great job putting clearer visuals to the book's blurry descriptions, but on the other hand, they cut so much it felt like a whirlwind and not in a good way. While I appreciate that they removed a lot of the cringe of the purity vibe and the over-explaining of the narration, so much detail was also removed that it made it hard to like any of the characters as they deserved. I actually loved Will and Al. I enjoyed hating Peter for the horrible things he does, like his attack on Edward, etc. I get that it's an approach we can make to almost any summer action movie, but I really would like to see one that cuts down on the action for the profit of the character moments that endear them to us. Especially here, where the action was quite meh. It's also a shame that they skip over so much because I thought all the actors were doing great work. It made it more frustrating. I liked so many of the small moments they managed to keep. Loved the hand-holding scene on the train. It actually came off genuine and not too cheesy. And the mother's death scene. Very realistic, especially when Triss pointlessly screams at them to stop. I also liked the sibling scene at the beginning before they go to the choosing ceremony. It was subtly emotional and effective. I'm not a fan of Shailene, but she surprised me here. She was compelling to watch, and she had fantastic chemistry with Theo James and the rest of the cast. The one thing I didn't want them to keep is Will being killed, but no luck there. Then again, it's my curse to fall in love with disposable secondary characters. A detail I also would have seen explored. I had a feeling Caleb chose Erudite, yes, because he felt a kinship there, but also because he was planning to spy on them. Either right from the start or after he'd been initiated and figured them out more. It felt like a possibility in the book, and it would have been a better storyline than the underuse of his character in this movie. I didn't get hung up on the whole for Tobias thing at the end of the movie like you guys did, but it's a very valid point that I missed. I guess I saw it differently because I was focused on how she used his fear of killing someone while looking at them to break the simulation. Something that made way more sense narratively than just talking to him and hoping her voice would cut through. In both the movie and the book, I thought the story should have just covered the test, the choosing ceremony, and the initiation. It could have ended on a cliffhanger with the discovery of the Erudites' plan, but having the whole attack botched and rushed at the end was a miscalculation, in my opinion. I get that it's harder to sell to a younger audience, but on the other hand, it would have made a better story for everyone else. Or they could have adapted the book as a miniseries. TV shows were more difficult to sell 10 years ago, but this really should have been one. They could have fixed the over-explaining of the book, the holes in the concept, and explored the characters and world more in depth. And maybe put better music over it all. The soundtrack was painful.
Yes.
P.S. Katie, you will have to tear the italicized O from my cold dead hands. It is the moment I look forward to in every single romantic storyline, in every medium, in every genre. I don't care if it's a trope, it's the trope that should always be used because it is infallible.
I don't know if you disagree with that, do you?
I don't even necessarily disagree with that. It's just something that I always find a little bit funny when I come across it. And it's especially funny, I think, in something that's not particularly well done.
Yeah.
Because it does tend to be a hallmark of stuff that's like not particularly well done.
Yes. Yeah, it's a very it's a very cliche trope, and so it shows up in stuff that is, you know, maybe not the most fleshed out, well-rounded literature.
Yeah.
But it's a great. Yeah, no, I have no problem with that. I think it's fun. I think it's a great moment. I love it. I have no problem with it. And I agree with a lot of what you said. I obviously, my point, I've argued before that everything should be a TV show. Despite my film degree, movies suck. It's not true, but every book adaptation should be a TV show, basically, arguably, in my opinion, barring certain very specific situations. Generally speaking, TV shows just give you more time to kind of flesh things out in a way that I find more satisfying, but perfect movies exist, so who knows. I also agree that the acting was great. I thought all the performances were really good, and I could have used them expanding some of the moments that she talked about in terms of the actual character work and not giving us quite as much of the action, because who cares? That doesn't really matter. Again, because the action even in the book was not particularly good or that interesting. And then I did not get anything. The main other thing I want to talk about is that I didn't get anything with the idea of Caleb joining Erudite as like a
I mean,
a covert agent.
When she meets back up with him at the end, he says something about how, like, after she visited him, he did like look into
but that's after
the stuff.
She
yeah,
him.
It
doesn't seem like he joined.
I never got the vibe that he was like a mole or anything,
or even remotely part of his motivation initially. Again, I think he does look into that after she talks to him. She kind of like snaps him out of it a little bit and makes him kind of second guess things and look into stuff a bit. But yeah, I didn't get any vibe that was the case in the book, but it would be interesting.
It would be interesting. They could have done something like that. I think what would be interesting is if he had stayed in Erudite and like continued to work
from the inside. Yeah, that would have been interesting.
That would have been really interesting.
Yeah, I think that would have worked especially after Triss comes and talks to him and kind of puts that doubt into him. He does some research, figures out what's going on, and then stays on the inside. And then you could go a while of not knowing, and maybe they could still do that where he somehow ends up back,
is able to go back. They like don't know that he left or something.
And then he goes back and then kind of works undercover. Which wasn't your idea that, or was that Tobias, or was it one of your predictions was that somebody
that was her friend Christine. I was gonna say it was gonna like defect over Will.
No. You had somebody was gonna get PETA'd. Was gonna get taken.
that was Caleb. That was Caleb. Yeah.
So you almost predict that's kind of what you're like the opposite, but but like a similar plot line of him going spirit, back.
Yes.
And it just reminded me of, I was like, I thought there was some prediction you had about basically Caleb being captured and then getting released back to them. Or them rescuing him, but then he was like brainwashed by, and it's like being mind controlled by Erudite. Whereas this is like the flip of that, where he goes back to them as a double agent. It goes back to Erudite as a double agent, which could be interesting. I don't know. Yeah, no, very cool.
All right, our last comment on Patreon was from Charlene, who said, I can't remember if this is ever mentioned in the books. I read them 10 years ago, enjoyed them, but didn't make a huge impression. But in my head, it makes sense for Triss not to recognize Tobias because he's just become a totally different person since leaving. He probably buffed up quite a bit going through Dauntless training. He's no longer living in an abusive situation. 16 to 18 feels late for a really transformative growth spurt, but that could have played into it as well. Add to the fact that he's introduced with a different name, it doesn't feel too off to me that she wouldn't have recognized him. It would feel odd if she didn't remember him after learning who he really was.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was about to say. Yeah, continue, sorry.
Unless he was totally hidden and it was like a what? Marcus never had a son kind of thing. No. So I agree that not addressing it at all is an oversight and something the movie could have corrected by adding a line or two.
Yeah, I think that's because I was thinking as the first part of this, I was like, okay, maybe. Like, if I'm being very generous, maybe it's possible that, yes, he has changed enough physically and it's just whatever. She only saw him a handful of times and he's different looking enough. Maybe he had longer hair and he cut his hair. Well, whatever, you know. Maybe there's enough physical changes that she doesn't recognize him. But then once she realizes who it is, or like once she's like, oh my God, this is Tobias, she should have like acknowledged it in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And in the book, she like, it's just never really addressed. Like, she knows who that is. She's like, oh, Tobias, that's Marcus's son. Like, she knows who it is, but doesn't seem to really know him at all.
Yeah.
Or like,
I don't know. I think that Veronica Roth could have done a lot of work here simply by having Triss, the first time she sees him, think to herself, he looks kind of familiar, but I couldn't place him, so I guess it's just somebody I saw in school a couple times or something.
Right. And yeah, from my memory, that does not happen.
No, I don't think it does.
Yeah, I agree that could have helped too. Again, it's not that big of a deal overall, but it's just one of those little things that's kind of like, okay, that got overlooked. It feels like.
It is, but it is, I think, one of those things that makes Triss feel very odd as a narrator.
Yeah.
Because there's just like stuff here and there that it's almost like she doesn't even react to.
Yeah.
That like a normal person would react to.
Yeah. Because you would think maybe once she realized, or like, because then, even in the book, if you had a line, once she realizes it's Tobias, that it's Marcus's son, and where she's like, she thinks to herself, we never really interact. Like, I'm stunned I didn't recognize him, but I guess it makes sense because we never really were around. We
didn't really talk to each other.
I was, a few years younger than him, and we never really ran in the same circles. I only saw him like twice, or you don't have to get super specific, but just any amount of like.
Any amount of acknowledgement that it's kind of a weird situation
that this
would have gone a long way.
That seemingly a person who was basically went to your high school in a relatively small community, because I saw somebody on the internet do the math about this as well. That was like, basing like on the number of initiates in Dauntless. And this is like the same thing people do with like Harry Potter and stuff, of like figuring out how many people are like part of this community roughly, or like how many kids at least are part of this community. Like Dauntless has 30 initiates, right? I believe total, something like that, in the ballpark of 30. Like half of them are transfers and half of them are Dauntless born or whatever. So they have roughly 30 initiates. If you assume every group has in the rough ballpark of 30, then it's only like, what is that? It's 150 kids.
Yeah.
Total for the whole, like in her grade, quote unquote, that would be her age.
Yeah.
Which means if it's a high school, that's 400 or 500 kids or whatever. Or whatever the math, 550 kids, I think. My brain is dying, but yes, somewhere in that ballpark. It's like under 1,000 kids and more than 400 kids. Why can't I do the math? 150 times 5 times 4. 200, 600. Good Lord, 600 kids in her like quote unquote high school. My high school had 2,000 kids. Not anymore, but when I was in high school, I knew every single person's name.
Yeah.
Probably. Maybe there was a handful.
You at least know their face.
You at least know their
passing.
face, and you at least,
You're like, that's that guy.
Yeah.
Even if you don't know their name.
And this is actually even a little bit different because that's all the kids everywhere. Like, she wouldn't have ever seen the Dauntless people, really.
Yeah.
That's 150 kids.
If he was from another faction, sure.
But that's 150 kids in abnegation, roughly, within a 4-year stretch.
Right.
So it's 150 kids that were in her. There's just no way you wouldn't.
No, yeah, because not only do they go to the same small high school, they live in the same neighborhood.
Yeah,
they probably live on the same street.
I guess that's a better comparison. There's 150 abnegation kids. Yes, in each year he was 2 above her. So even if you add all those people, it's like 400 people, like kids roughly, that from between her grade and his grade. And that 400 people, that, like, my senior class was 450 kids or something like that. And I knew every single person's name, had probably spoken to almost every single person at least a handful of times.
Yeah.
Had classes with like every single person a handful of times. Yeah, it's just, and that's disregarding the fact that they would have grown up. Again, if they were 6 years apart, 5 years apart, okay,
sure,
they're 2 years apart. Yeah, it doesn't add up, I don't think. But
all right, Charlene's last comment here was, anyway, looking forward to James and the Giant Peach. It was the first chapter book we did as a read aloud when my son was 4. He's 8 now, but I might try to revisit with him and get his input for the listener poll.
That would be the first 8-year-old's input for the listener poll.
That'd
be the first child's input we've had, or think, maybe. I don't want to say that necessarily. We may have had some, like Kelly or somebody may have gotten one of their kids' input on something previously that I'm just not recalling. But please do have them watch the movie too and scare them. And then I don't think it's that scary, but it's got some.
It's got some creepy moments.
Some creepy moments. It is a Henry Selick film, but yeah, we would love to have your child's feedback on this one. That would be a lot of fun.
Over on Facebook, we got 3 votes for the movie, 3 votes for the book, 0 for the movie, rather. Andy said, I only saw the movie and was a bit sleepy listening to the pod, but if I'm remembering things correctly, the gist is the film versions of key scenes in the book generally tend to be less bloody, less sharp, and bland or functional, with a cheesy score, and you chose the film so it still manages to be better than the book. Ouch.
Yeah, it is because we both struggled with what we were going to pick. It's not like it's an easy. This isn't like 50 Shades where it's like, wow, this is just way better than the book, in pretty much every way. That is not the case. Yeah,
it was really a 6 of one, half a dozen of the other
with
kind of
just
situation
a slight
here.
Edge going to the films.
I think, it is true that there's a lot more blood and violence and that kind of stuff has a little bit more teeth in the book. But I also have kind of a problem in that if you compare it again to the Hunger Games, I can really tell what the point of the violence is in the Hunger Games. Yeah. And in this one, it's kind of like it has a vague point, but I don't really know that
that's a good
that
point.
Violence is being used to make some sort of really solid, tangible point. I feel like most of the time I felt like it was just there.
It's there in an attempt to kind of world build, honestly. It's there for world building in the Divergent series, I think, and to set up the brutality of this world and the brutality of the factions and stuff like that. But yes, it does not have the same point that the Hunger Games does, because in this, the violence is at equal time celebrated and sort of horrifying. Like it's the Dauntless by their nature are like violent, and so the point in the Hunger Games is very clearly that this system of violence that they have created to maintain control is brutal and horrifying, and putting these children through this because it's in an attempt to
maintain power.
To maintain power is horrifying, and it draws parallels to the way we exert violence on classes of people to maintain power in our world, basically.
Yeah.
This book's depiction of violence doesn't really have a similar point, particularly. Yes. It is. So I actually do agree with that, despite the fact that very often a lot of the things I criticized the movie for was not, being as brutal or being as sort of forthright with the violence that the book is. I do agree that that maybe there's an argument to be made that it shouldn't be, because the book doesn't seem to have a lot to say about that violence necessarily.
Yeah.
Whereas the Hunger Games clearly does. And when we were being critical of the Hunger Games movies for removing some of that violence, it was because it literally kneecaps the point that the book is making. Whereas here it doesn't as much.
Nah.
I still think it does a little bit, and potentially could, depending on where these books go. It's hard to tell, but it's very clear from moment one in the Hunger Games what the violence is there for, why it exists, and what it's doing in the narrative and thematically. And whereas here, we're still not sure where this is going and what the point of this is going to be. Whereas the Hunger Games, it was pretty clear from the beginning. Obviously, it had nuances and it went different directions here and there, but overall, it's about the violence used to control people and how horrifying that is, and the ways in which people, can be beaten, blah blah blah, all those sort of things. I agree. It doesn't.
It's an interesting distinction. Yeah, I think
for sure.
Our next comment was from Steven. Steven said, "I barely remember the movie as another meh YA entry, and I never bothered to watch the sequels, but I do remember enjoying the book. The book was also just another YA entry, but I enjoyed it enough and read the 2 sequels. Unfortunately, the third failed to really close out the series in a good way."
Oh, can't wait.
It's one of many comments that make me feel very apprehensive about the rest of this series.
Yeah.
Our last comment on Facebook was from Josh. Josh said, "The movie was better than the book, though both are extremely difficult to sit through. The acting in the movie is so terrible, I don't know if I should be laughing at the acting or upset."
Interesting.
I disagree. I thought it's not like award-winning acting.
No. I don't think anybody deserves an Oscar in this movie, but I thought it was fine. I thought it was mostly fine. There are points where it's a little, there's scenes here and there, but it's this kind of story. The dialogue and stuff they're working with is not exactly groundbreaking already, so you're already going to have kind of struggling, but I thought when the acting worked, which was most of the time, it worked pretty well, and there was even a few scenes that I thought really stood out as being really, really good. Again, we'll talk about it more, and we've already talked about it at least once. Shayla, when Triss's mom dies, is just regardless of context, just a brilliantly acted scene, I think. And brilliantly written, which again is not how it is in the book. So it was another little point we gave to the film. But yeah, even apart from that, I thought everybody was pretty good.
If I were to stack up my complaints about the movie, acting would be like way down at the bottom.
Very, very
very
low.
Far down at the bottom.
Yes.
Over on Twitter, we had 0 votes for the book and 10 for the movie. Kelly Napier said, "I also went with the movie this time. I thought they did a good job of capturing the important parts of the book while dropping the things that aren't needed to drive the plot. The extra initiates that aren't Triss, Peter, Christina, and Will don't need them. Al, she's already missing her brother and parents. She doesn't need another relationship to mourn, or it starts to weigh down everything. This book feels very much like what it is. Someone's first attempt at doing something." Yeah. "I think the movie did a good job of cleaning up Roth's weak points from it being her first novel and her not really knowing how to tighten things up. I actually liked in the movie that Triss's mom looks pained after the choosing ceremony in the movie versus the slight smile in the book. I think it comes back to the fact that moms know their kids, and her mom would have realized through the years that she was probably divergent. In my mind, she's grimacing in the movie because she knows Dauntless is not a safe place for her daughter to be if being who you are is dangerous if discovered."
But that's true.
That's a fair point.
Yes, but that's also true of every faction, it would seem, in this universe. We being divergent, we would assume it would be a problem no matter what faction you're in, because she doesn't know about the plot between the Erudite and the Divergent and the way they're working together.
But she does know because her mom is from Dauntless, so she knows that the Dauntless use the simulations all the time. That's true. And that the way you behave in the simulations can out you as being divergent.
Okay, I guess that's fair. Yeah, I guess it is possible that if the other factions don't have some sort of similar, because we don't know.
Yeah, we don't know what their initiation process is.
We have no idea what their initiation processes look like. and if they do anything else that would, be able to kind of find out divergence or not. So if that's the case, then yes, I guess that could potentially make sense. I can see what Kelly's saying, and I don't necessarily entirely disagree, but I just liked it as a clue and a tease for what her mom's story was.
Kelly went on to say, I think the zombie dauntless stuff in the book took place at night, but to explain it being light outside in the movie, I think it started in the early morning. Like they would have been sleeping, but it's not the middle of the night. It starts at like 4 or 5 a.m. By the time they got everyone ready and transported, it would have been light out. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it probably makes sense.
I don't know. My problem with that scene in the movie, I think, was that while I agree with you that putting a scene like that in the light can make it more horrifying, like you talked about Schindler's List, I think that the way the violence and the bloodiness got kneecapped, it being in the light, just like threw that into sharper relief.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's what we said in the episode, or what you said in the episode. Yeah.
This is my second time reading the books, and I've seen the movies a few times through the years, and it's always bothered me that it's never explained if the other factions limit the number of initiates that actually make it into the faction. Are there rankings and cuts in amity or abnegation? I have to assume not, based on the personality of the faction.
We assume not, at least for abnegation, based on Triss's kind of surprise at the idea that people just get kicked out of Dauntless, like willy-nilly seemingly.
Yeah.
She seems like you would think she would at least be somewhat familiar with what goes on in abnegation, and so this all seems like a surprise to her, so you would assume at least there it's either doesn't happen that people don't make it through initiation, or it's incredibly rare that somebody doesn't make it through initiation for some reason.
Yeah. I mean, I would also assume not in amity.
Yes, you would assume the same thing.
They're the nice faction.
You would assume that. I'm just going based on what we can kind of glean from what is textually supported.
I would also assume that Erudite and Candor don't cut people either, because they seem to be the kind of people who would want a lot of people.
You would think you could see
those
two, at least you could understand.
I could make an argument for those two over amity or abnegation, because amity and abnegation are both all about like kindness and like selflessness and blah blah blah. Erudite, I could see them maybe giving like an IQ test, and if you don't, you don't hit a certain threshold, you get kicked out.
The only other one we know anything about the induction process is Candor.
Yes,
because Christina talks a little bit about it in the book.
Is that where she talks about they use lie detector tests? So maybe if you can't pass a lie detector,
you can fail.
You could fail initiation,
potentially.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll find out.
Yeah.
Okay, Kelly went on to say, so only Dauntless has initiation as a competition. The factionless must be mostly Dauntless dropouts, if that's the case.
That's an interesting point. And it could be, that would be an interesting thing to explore, because it does then seem surprising that the Dauntless seem to be so, or the factionless seem to be so. I will say, I really hope the factionless get explored more in future stories.
Oh, I said to you, like, right after we started reading the book, I was like, if this does not end with the factionless burning it all to the ground, I don't want it.
Yes, no, I agree, but I'm hoping we learn more about them and why. Obviously, they're relegated to a part of society where they don't have a lot of opportunity and stuff, and it's obviously a commentary on homelessness and the people that are cast out of society and relegated to kind of the worst of
the way that the system creates unhoused people and
But so that's obviously the allegory or what we're going for here. But I think the thing that's interesting is that I was wondering again, because we have seen so little of the factionless and kind of really have only seen them from afar. They just seem to be like wandering the streets dirty again, as a very thinly veiled, not even thinly veiled, just a very obvious blank obvious in your face allegory for unhoused people. I just want to know why. It seems like the people, because very often the people that end up unhoused, there's lots of different scenarios and situations that can lead to that and stuff, but they seem to have their own section of the city with housing and stuff. Like they seem to go to an area of the city,
like a place,
and they there's housing, at least to some extent, throughout the city that they could use. And so my question is, it seems like everybody who becomes factionless just immediately in this universe, like, gives up and doesn't try to do anything. Like I want to know if there's like a factionless, like, you would think that the people who didn't make it, especially the people who didn't make it into Dauntless, which seems like that's maybe most of who these people are, would be the kind of people in this universe. Again, this is where it gets muddy as an allegory for unhoused people because it's way more complicated. But seemingly in this universe, as this allegory, you would think the kind of people that if you're trying to get into Dauntless or whatever, and you flunked out or you didn't make it in, and now you're factionless. I don't get why all those people seemingly just like immediately just start living on the street and give up. Yeah. Why,
I don't know.
You would think that the factionless would be like almost become like if they're mostly Dauntless, would like form like rebel factions and like would try to like tear the system down or something. Like, it just seems
and especially because it ostensibly it even includes like Dauntless born initiates who don't make the 10% cut or whatever it is.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. Yeah, and even if not, then you have people that are from the other factions, so you would have people with maybe more rounded skill sets. It just and again, it's hard to know because we just don't know anything. And so maybe they do. Maybe there is a thriving, like, maybe what we've seen of the factionless is kind of just the surface level that most of the people in, the other factions see, but there is maybe a more thriving or robust, interesting.
Maybe that's the series District 13.
Yeah,
maybe they have an underground.
Maybe I don't.
Where they're just living a normal society.
Yes, it's just because very often, and I guess that's what I'm getting at. And I'm not an expert on unhoused and homeless people and stuff like that, but very often the people that end up homeless or unhoused or what have you, it's very often because of things like addiction, because of things like unemployment or mental health, severe mental health issues. Severe debt that causes them and forces them into this that then often coincides with other things. It's usually a lot of comorbid conditions between like mental health issues, obviously poverty caused by the fucking fucked up system we exist in, lots of things. And so seemingly in the universe of Divergent, the people who end up factionless aren't coming from a place of those causes.
Yeah.
So it seems strange to me that they so quickly fall into like our universe's version of unhoused people. Does that make sense at all? Like I don't understand how you have a bunch of people who are seemingly mentally healthy, or physically healthy. They're just not the best of the best of the best with honors, sir, for Dauntless and stuff like, and other groups or whatever, or like, they couldn't pass every single perfect lie detector test or whatever for candor. And then as soon as they're factionless, they just don't, what happens? And I don't know. And maybe there's some other reasons. Maybe Erudite's doing something where they're literally like, maybe they're poisoning their food supplies, or maybe they're doing something that is causing them, or maybe that's the point, is that literally just being divested of the societal structure that exists in this world disenfranchises them in such a way that it becomes nearly impossible for them to like create a cohesive society or anything like that has its own sort of support structures and stuff. I don't know, and I'm just interested to see where it goes, because it feels like it feels like she's making this allegory that doesn't match with the material conditions that create the material conditions that create unhoused people in Western society, in our world right now, feel very different than the material conditions that create the factionless in the Divergent series. And I don't know why they somehow manifest the same way, I guess, is my point.
I don't know. I don't know where she's going with that. I will say I do not have a lot of faith that we're going to get like a nuanced and poignant depiction.
I agree. I just, Anyway, sorry. I should have saved that for a main episode. That was way too long of a...
Kelly went on to say, thank you for pointing out that Triss would have known who 4 was when she got there. That was so ridiculous. I do love the fact that these books expressly state that the story takes place in the Chicago area. I noted when y'all did the Hunger Games that it bothered me to know that the story took place in the dystopian former United States, but not to know what states the district comprised geographically.
Yeah, we talked about how we wished there was like a map or something.
Yeah. The author is very clear about it being Chicago, and I appreciate it because it helps me build the visual picture in my brain as I'm reading. My favorite part in the movie is one that doesn't take place in the book. It's when she's doing the zip lining and almost smashes into the wall when the brakes fail. I like the movie increasing the idea of the constant peril that Triss is facing. She can't even relax to enjoy herself because death is literally always lurking. Even the Dauntless seem relieved that she was able to stop at the last second. When she did it in the book without consequence, I was left wondering what we're supposed to take away from that scene.
I imagine it's just that the act of ziplining from the top of a very tall building is itself inherently dangerous
and also exhilarating.
And less so that there's like a specific like, if you don't stop in time at the end, you'll crash into a wall and die. It's more so the cable could snap, you could fall, your harness could break, you could fall, whatever. It's the idea of bungee jumping or whatever, skydiving. It's not necessarily that you have to, but I can see what you're saying, that it is an added layer of
for sure.
danger.
I imagined Dauntless HQ being in an old abandoned hotel, one of those where all the rooms face into a giant atrium in the middle, or maybe an old mall. Just someplace already existing that would have the logical space for a giant pit and chasm in the middle of it.
I do think that is basically what it's just some sort of either hotel or old office building.
Some building that had like an atrium feature. At some point. So TLDR, I'm voting for the movie without spoiling anything that probably won't hold through the next 2 installments. Great.
Fantastic.
Love to hear that. Next comment was from Adam Wick, who said, the movie, if only because it's a much shorter ordeal.
There you go. Yep, that's fair.
Similar to how I felt. Last comment on Twitter was from Shelby's In Her Capybara Era. Shelby said, I have a long history with this one. I saw the movie in theaters just because and thought it was fine. The first time I read it, I enjoyed it in a just don't think about it way. The second time, I had read the sequels, and I was very familiar with the author's favorite trope. No spoilers, but it's not one I particularly care for. It's subtle in this one if you don't know to look for it, but when you know, it's retroactively obvious. This time, I was reading Divergent post-pandemic, and a lot of things I used to brush off as eccentricities, I no longer have the patience for. I can't help noticing that this story is about 2 siblings from an idealized, if extreme, conservative background, leaving home to explore their own interests. One of them joins the militia faction. It's dark and edgy, but also cool, brave, and empowering. Sure, there's corruption, but that's just a few bad apples. Her pacifist dad even realizes that there's a time and place for guns. The other sibling joins the faction that believes ignorance is the root of all evil. This faction's rotten to the core, and he should be ashamed of his thirst for knowledge. Their evil plan is literally an injection that somehow mind controls you. Then there's the Divergents, these multifaceted free thinkers who confront science and say, this isn't real, I don't have to participate, I can't be controlled. I met these Divergents as an essential worker throughout the pandemic. Why, yes, this book did leave me feeling salty, whatever gave it away. On a lighter note, I think you will be pleasantly surprised by how at least one of your predictions turns out.
What a tease.
I picked the movie for 2 reasons. First, the mom's death scene has stayed with me. I sometimes forget what movie it's from, but I remember that scene.
It's a very good scene.
Second, the movie remembers that this is the fun installment of the trilogy and keeps that energy throughout. It kind of drops off in the book.
Yeah, I can see that a little bit. The movie stays fun. I thought the book was mostly fun throughout as well, like as fun as it could be, I guess. I do think there's definitely something interesting to the idea that it seems like, at least so far, the Dauntless are presented as flawed in some minor ways, but good generally. Like pretty okay. and that the erudite, that does not seem to be the case.
Yes.
It seems to be
they're just all evil.
They're just evil.
Yeah.
And it's not like, oh, actually, it's actually mostly what they're doing is good. It's just been corrupted by
a couple people.
By Kate Winslet or whatever. It doesn't seem that the books are saying that, which is very strange and does make me worried for the morality tale that this story will ultimately weave, because it does. I do find it questionable, because it does. We were talking about, it seems like the point should be, and maybe is going to be, hey, these factions are dumb. Everybody should be everything. Blah blah blah. And even, I mean, it seems like Tobias is stating essentially the thesis when he's like, I don't want to be just one thing. I want to be everything. It seems like
that does feel like a thesis statement. It does feel like
a thesis statement. But we have yet to see any redeeming qualities in the erudite or any inclination that any of our characters think there's anything to be redeemed in the erudite faction. It seems like we really only think like Dauntless and Abnegation have anything worth going on. Like, but again, we all are also only currently kind of seeing the perspective of a character who grew up in Abnegation and went to Dauntless. So we don't really have those other perspectives necessarily. We have, a little bit from like Christina, who was Candor and blah, blah, blah. But it's all very minimal, and it's all filtered through our main character going, that's weird and I don't like it.
Yeah, and I think the closest thing we have to any kind of like redeeming moment with erudite is Will. Because Will was a transfer from erudite.
Right.
He's dead.
Yes, we killed him.
So, we killed him, so...
We shot him in the face, yes. Yeah, I don't know. I'll be interested to see where it goes. Yeah, because that is definitely an interesting point, that it despite what we seemingly feel like maybe the series is ultimately kind of going to say, it doesn't so far have anything nice to say about the smart, brainy, thinky people. So I don't know.
Okay, so over on Instagram, we had 5 votes for the book and 7 for the movie. Mladen Kulich said, "This one is an easy choice. My vote goes to the movie. I listened to the audiobook, and while I did enjoy the story, I thought the descriptions of the world, buildings, guns, clothes, etc. were severely lacking. The movie, on the other hand, was able to show the world of Divergent through its visuals. The political aspect about framing Beatrice's father is more engaging in the movie than waiting 10 or more chapters for it to happen in the book. The side characters in the book were one-dimensional in service of the main character moving forward in the story. In the movie, some of them were more memorable than others. Beatrice's mom and dad, Janine, Eric, and Christine. Peter, I thought, was pretty tame compared to his book counterpart. Al is just there, and Caleb was pointless. Forrest's personality in the movie is better and more believable than the book, since all the tough talk 18-year-old Forrest speaks is laughable if you think about it. Like, age doesn't matter. So many sex jokes I could write. I don't remember him saying that.
I don't remember that either.
Maybe he does, and I just don't recall. Triss is more relatable in the book since we're in her head and feel everything she's going through, before it comes tedious with her judgy personality and getting angry even for small things like a piece of advice.
She's a moody teenager. I try to forgive some of that. You got to try to put yourself in the framework at least a little bit of what this character is, who they are, and why they behave a little bit the way they do. So yes, she is a little judgy, a little
I was also
obnoxious,
a little judgy and obnoxious as a 16-year-old.
I try to, kind of remember that as an older person reading a story about a younger person.
Triss in the movie is just fine, but at least her and Ford didn't shag right away, and their relationship feels more believable in the movie, which for me was an improvement.
I don't know
if maybe I'm not understanding the use of shag here, because they definitely don't have sex in the book.
Not at all in the book, and definitely not right away. And maybe
they kiss quite a bit,
but not even for a long time.
No,
again, the book is very purity culture, courtshipy. Like they take. I'm not exactly sure what.
Because I'm like under the impression that I know what shag means, because that's more of like British slang,
that just
than
means
American
sex,
slang.
Yes.
Yeah, see, that's what I think.
Yeah, I don't know. They said they listened to the audiobook. Maybe they...
I wonder if it was a translation.
Maybe? And
maybe there's
there
a
was
translation issue. Yeah.
Or something. Yeah, because in the book, they don't have sex at all, let alone right away. If that's what you're saying here, and that was different than the movie, it does not happen in either. So, I don't know.
If you read this far, I have questions about the factionless in both the book and the movie.
So do we.
So do we ever.
Evidenced by my rant.
If the factionless exist, why are there no bounty hunters and criminals? Or are the factionless only reduced to poor people? And even if the bounty hunters and criminals exist, are they considered more as divergents? I don't know.
I mean, I guess trying to figure out what, again, I think this may be translated, so maybe we're trying to kind of suss. Maybe we're a little bit lost in translation here. But I assume what they're saying is, if the factionless, assuming the factionless exist as portrayed, we also seems like there's no crime or anything. And you would think if you had this large population of completely disenfranchised people, right, you would have crime.
Who are intentionally kept incredibly poor.
Intentionally kept.
Yeah, the lack of crime, I think, is interesting.
I will say I don't know if there is a lack of crime. The only we don't know, but I will say that's a failing of the book and the movie. It is there's a failing in world building potentially there, right. But we know there's no crime supposedly in abnegation.
Right.
But we don't know if there's any crime, period.
True.
Like, we don't know.
So, yeah, right. As far as the narrator that we're in the perspective of knows, there's no crime.
Maybe. She never addresses it. There's no crime in the abnegation factions, like little compoundy, their little ticky-tacky houses, their frickin', McMansions or whatever. There's no crime there. She just doesn't address at all what the crime is like in the rest of the world. You know what I mean? Like, we just don't know.
Right. So it's either a failure, it is a failure of world building, but like if there's intentionally no crime in this world building, then I would like to know more about that.
Yeah.
And if we don't, then that's another failure of world building, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
Overall, neither the book nor movie are that memorable, but if I had to pick one, I would much rather watch the movie than listen to the audiobook again. And I'll be joining you for the rest of the series.
Oh, that's fun.
Excellent. Other comment on Instagram was from Jane Rendelman, who said, I'm choosing the movie purely on the fact that it gets me through the story faster.
There we go. Another one of those. Fair enough. All right, and we have one last comment over on Instagram. This one came in just under the wire. We had already finished recording, actually, so I'm going to be handling this one by myself as I was finishing up the edit today. Just for everybody in the future, or, just so people know, generally we record on Monday nights. Usually we record on Monday nights. That's Central Time Zone, U.S., generally, but sometimes it's Tuesday night. So sometimes if you send us a message or post a comment on Tuesday, following the main episode week or whatever, sometimes we'll be able to get to it. Other times we won't. But if we see them like this, I did this recently for another comment, like, I don't know, a handful of weeks ago, where it came in a little bit late after we had already recorded. So I came in and just read it and addressed it myself. So let's get to it. We had to get to this one because it's from one of my best friends from high school, a groomsman in my wedding, Mr. Dr. John Pauly. John, all right, here's what he had to say over on Instagram. It won't let me post a comment for some reason, so here's a DM. I think that was one of the issues as well. I have to 100% agree that both the book and movie are incredibly mid, but the movie rounds out a number of the themes that the book couldn't, so I have to give it to the movie. This was a series I've been intrigued about for years, but never knew anyone that had actually seen or read it, and now I know why. Does this series have the narrowest range of an audience for any of the quote-unquote popular YA series? I think it does. I think this is probably, I don't know if it's the least, but it's definitely among the ones that, made it into movies. It's definitely less than Twilight, Hunger Games, Harry Potter, pick your poison. Maze Runner might be less. I don't know. Would be the only other one that I think would be close is the Maze Runner series, which I also know zero things about, but it's definitely in a lower tier, I would say. Moving on, Pauly said, Its multiple depictions of extreme violence raises the bottom age of appropriateness, but its incredibly generic perception of how different people choose to act would be blown by anyone who's attended freshman college or freshman orientation at college. I agree with that, which supposedly Veronica Roth did before writing this, but So considering this is a series specifically for kids like 14 to 18, it still kind of sucks. It advertises a plot of sci-fi government conspiracy, but delivers a plot solely of one individual's character development with a small side of sci-fi. Roth must have known someone high up to get this, her first novel, bought by a major movie studio basically as soon as it was published. It could be that. My other speculation is more so that one, I think it had the pre-sales did well. It got whatever, something with publishing. I don't know how that whole world works. But I think the most important thing is we are right peak in the frenzy of Hunger Games, Twilight, all of the YA movie boom of the early 2010s. Studios were looking for anything that they thought they could make a bunch of money on. So I'm fairly certain that is plays a big component in it. As for why it became such a popular book, I'm not exactly sure. Again, we're still in that big boom of YA fantasy, sci-fi, dystopia stuff. They thought they were found their next Hunger Games, I think is really what it was. I agreed, going on, Paulie says, I agreed that the world building was very lacking, but my biggest issues was that I don't know anyone's motivation for anything. Why is Dauntless so revered? What do they do that other than be assholes to literally everyone and look cool? Why does Ford just not do anything about the crap Dauntless is doing? He's been offered leadership many times, but keeps turning it down so he can look from the side and shake his head. I will agree. I don't know. I'm thinking there's maybe some that does get expanded on a little bit in the book from my memory. I can't recall of why I think it's partially because he was, I think the explanation, and I could be wrong about this, but this is and I may just be making this up. I think part of the reason, justification for him, not trying to take a leadership role and change things or affect things is that he is divergent and didn't want to get caught. I think he thought if he, got into a leadership position, maybe that would require some more testing or more scrutiny on him that would result in him being outed as divergent. Potentially. I don't know. That's the main thing I can think. Because otherwise, yeah, he seems to hate everything they're doing or the news direction they're going, but just kind of like sits around and is like, this sucks. Maybe we'll find out there was some secret plan all along that he was a part of or something. Who knows? Why does Janine even do what she did? Her faction seems to want for nothing, and they give no evidence that abnegation is actually doing anything wrong. Why does this faction system entrapped in this wall, locked from the outside, even exist? Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a flimsy plot that is kind of asking you not to look too closely at it, I think. So yeah, it's not, not the sturdiest of foundations. You both covered most of the holes in this, but thank you for also noting that it makes no sense for Triss and Tobias to not know each other. That drove me crazy. Yes, it drove us crazy as well. And one thing I will point out that I didn't hear you mention is that while there are annoyingly overt Christian themes throughout that I rolled my eyes at, the author did also include child abuse by the leader of the quote-unquote Christian faction that is baldly ignored by many, and at least through this book, caused no consequences to that person of power, even though the accusations ended up being true. Good show, bad book. I assume he's saying good show is in our show. Thank you, Polly. Good show, bad book. Looking forward to the deep character development of girl's short haircut in the next movie. Oh no, does she get her hair cut short in the next movie? I literally haven't looked up or know anything about what happens with this series, so I haven't even seen like posters or trailers or anything from the future movies. As blind as you could possibly be about about where this series goes, but I'm excited for short-haired Triss if we get it. That could be fun. And yeah, we also were wondering if, the fact that Marcus was literally physically abusing his son is going to come back. It doesn't seem like the book approves of it necessarily. It is presented as a bad thing. Triss calls him out and yells at him about it in the book. Doesn't really in the movie. That part kind of gets glossed over. Which we did mention. But I do think eventually that will be addressed. I truly hope at least that it's not going to be, that this book is not going to be doing child abuse apologia. I hope. I don't think it is, but we'll see. You never know. The twists and turns these summer series can sometimes be surprising, shall we say. So thank you very much for that comment, Paulie. Always appreciated. Sorry Katie wasn't here. She's actually out running errands right now, but I just needed to wrap this up so I could get this edit done. Hope my lonely commentary on your on your message was adequate.
And over on Goodreads, we had one listener who couldn't decide. That listener was Miko, our Goodreads friend.
Champion.
Miko said, Divergent was somewhat better than I expected based on its reputation, although I think most of the slander is aimed at the sequels, but I still did not find much value in it. It's good to know I wasn't the only one laughing at the train chasing music.
Yes. Oh my goodness. So bad.
I feel the book starts better than the movie as we are privy to all of Triss's thoughts, so her actions, like choosing Dauntless, feel more justified.
That's fair. I can see that potentially. It's we talked about this. It's so hard to know when you've read the book how that really translates.
Sometimes it's not as hard to kind of figure that out. With this one, it feels really difficult to me to try to like look at the movie and figure out like how much of this is decipherable to someone who has not read the book.
One of the reasons that the whole premise of the show is around one of us not reading the books. Usually that is, one of the I don't want to say failings, but it is one of the things about the summer series that is a little, different than normal is we don't have that perspective. Because we didn't want to force anybody to watch these movies. To be honest, we didn't want to try to ask one of our friends to watch these movies on our behalf this time. So,
however, the movie ends stronger, and just after watching it, I would have probably given this to the movie. But the more I think about it, the less sure I am. Had I not read the book first, I'm sure the movie would have come across more confusing. For example, as a person I subjected to the movie found it weird that Triss got a bird tattoo when it seems birds are one of her fears.
That totally makes sense.
Yeah. The movie is missing both explanations, that the tattoo symbolizes her family members and that the attacking birds in the simulation are her fear of losing control, and so those aren't really connected.
Yes, which it's very strange, I thought, in the book as well. Like, it's just like, it's kind of a confusing, okay, so she gets a tattoo of these ravens, but then she's attacked by crows.
Yeah,
and it was already a little weird in the book, at least, but there was an explanation for what those things meant that the movie just completely omits.
I disagree about the shooting of Will. Trish shoots multiple people in the limbs, like Eric and some nameless zombie, but her mind-controlled friend, an intentional headshot. It's because he's erudite. He's evil.
Yes.
Also, are the Dauntless so incompetent they don't teach to aim at the center of mass?
Veronica Roth did not do research on anything.
On nothing.
So
she wrote from her heart.
Yes. Yeah.
And then none of her editors said, well, wait a minute.
Yeah, because I actually had that thought in that moment of like, well, you shouldn't have shot him in the head. But it's also sometimes you tweak those things just for dramatic effect.
Yes.
Like it's, whatever. Yes, obviously, if you're a highly trained military like wing of this, faction within this universe, they would understand that generally good idea to shoot center mass because you're more likely to hit your target and blah blah blah, and it's there's plenty of don't aim for the head, that's stupid, but like in the drama of the moment, that's why you use that, because it's just a more impactful when she says the line the bullet hit him in the head because that's where I was aiming. It's more dramatic than not that much more than the bullet hit him in the chest because that's where I was aiming, but whatever, still there's I don't disagree. I also don't disagree that it is a little funny that she apparently needs to shoot him in the head.
After she just maimed multiple other people.
Yeah. That's fair.
Miko went on to say, in the movie, she tries to yell and snap him out of the mind control, and when that doesn't work, she has to shoot. The book version read so clearly as, I gotta quickly kill my friend so I have repercussions in the sequel, that I groaned. While in the movie, I felt Triss was going with the only available option. It could still be bloodier, on that I agree.
I think that was my main note, is that it just feels, again, like the stakes of what she's doing here aren't as amplified as they are in the book. When she shoots Will in the face in the book, I felt horrible because I liked Will and I didn't like that she had to shoot him. And I agree that the movie maybe does a slightly better job in the scene of like elevating to the point where she feels like she has to shoot him. But again, I think there's just something that I don't know. Again, maybe the series isn't saying anything interesting with it, but the idea of depicting the brutally violent acts that are occurring in this world as brutally violent and awful feels true and honest to me, whereas kind of portraying them as like, oh, she shot him and he just kind of slumped over, maybe he's alive, I don't know, feels, again, it's implied he's dead, but like the bloodless sort of clean sanitized version of the violence we get in the movies just feels like we don't have the same level of, it just doesn't feel like, it just feels like you're sanitizing the violence because you can't show the violence because it's a PG-13 movie, when it does feel like, again, maybe not as solid of a point or as clear and obvious of a point of as like the Hunger Games of what the violence is doing, in that it still feels like there's at least some layer to this of the horrible things that she's going through are horrible and they should feel horrible. Whereas in the movie, it just sanitizes it just enough in some of these instances where it doesn't feel that horrible. Yeah. And I feel like it should feel horrible. I don't know.
Yeah. End of Miko's comment. But all my other critiques are minor compared to my underlying grievance with the story. I do not believe for a second that this world could work. I would agree with that, yes. The world building feels so unfinished that I don't even have to pull a thread to see it unravel. Like, what does Candor even do? Is a full fifth of the population lawyers?
Because they do mention them working in the legal system, but it's like how many, and again, this is the thing.
Like, where's the crime? What are the lawyers doing?
Well, there is crime. Again, I don't know why everybody thinks there's no crime. There's no implication in the series that there's no crime. There's no crime.
Implication that there is crime.
But why would you assume there isn't? There's only no crime in abnegation. She says, I believe she says, because I thought I saw somebody else say this too, and I was like, I did not get the vibe at all from the book that this is a crimeless world. Abnegation, nobody in abnegation has killed or like committed a violent crime in years or decades or whatever, because them specifically, or at least that we know of, has committed any violent crimes or whatever, because their faction specifically is so dead set on being so selfless and blah 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 or whatever. I have no reason to think that the other factions don't do all kinds of fucked up crime and shit. Like I just don't know. I don't know why. Anyways, sorry. But I agree, you don't need that many lawyers. I don't know what else, because I do agree with it. Well, I don't know what Candor does.
I don't know what they're about. I'm not sure.
Like, what is the, they're very truthful. Okay.
Okay.
Also, they wouldn't be lawyers. I don't understand what that, like, what, I don't understand. It doesn't make any sense. It's just, I get it. They're the idea is that they're the best, like, they're actually good lawyers. I get, like, they're good they're the platonic ideal of lawyers or something, but, like, but even then, that's not how that's not how the judicial system works. You actually you want zealous advocates for your client, and that may include, in fact, lying, kind of.
Withholding the truth.
If you know your client is guilty,
your job as their lawyer is to create reasonable doubt.
And maybe you can argue more morally that's not great, but like the way the system of, and again, we don't know how the law system here works.
Right, maybe it's completely different.
If you have an adversarial law system, you actually do want lawyers that will argue for their client even if they know they're guilty. Like, that's the point of an adversarial legal system. You actually want that. Now, whether or not you want the adversarial legal system we have, I don't know. I'm not a fucking law philosopher. Or legal philosopher, but like I'm just saying, within the system, assuming their system operates like ours, you actually want lawyers to lie sometimes, or at least to some extent. Like, you need lawyers that are willing to go up there and be like, my client's innocent even if they know they're not. That's how the system operates. I don't know.
I don't know, because I don't know what Candor would, what would they do? I don't know.
I don't know either.
Hopefully we find out. Okay, if I cared more, I could probably decide which version is better, but for now, it's a tie. They're just meh in slightly different ways.
No. What's wrong with Amity? You can't know. I disagree, Miko. Give me one thing.
The book versus the movie.
Oh, I thought they were saying of the factions.
No.
Okay, so if I cared more, I could probably decide which version. I thought they were talking about the factions. They could decide which faction is better. My bad. My apologies. It's like, it's obviously Amity. But yes, fair enough.
Also, the fence is a straight up Duga radar.
I looked this up. It's 100% what it is. Yeah. It's a specific radar that the Soviets built in the 60s and then used through the 80s.
Duga radar used by the Soviet Union around the 80s. So clearly they just picked a cool looking design without thinking why it would look like that in the movie's world.
It would be really interesting if it came back and in fact they needed that radar system for something, because although it wouldn't make any sense, I will say this, it makes no sense because they clearly have technology well beyond. This is like a radar array from the 60s that is like this big gigantic wall of things putting out radio signals or whatever. Specifically the Duga radar, from what I did like the most minimal like 5 minutes of reading earlier today. It was designed specifically as like a missile defense system to like to detect incoming like aerial missiles or whatever. And so you could,
I guess we don't know that that's not a threat.
Sure. My point would, because that's what I was thinking at first. I was like, oh, maybe it makes sense that they would have this, like, for some reason. But they also have like supercomputers that can run crazy advanced VR simulations that. Right. So like, okay, what is again, this falls back to the world building of like, what is the technology level here? We have this radar system from the this is the books or the movie's fault, I guess it's not in the book, but we have this radar system from the 70s. And then we have supercomputers from the future.
I mean, in the book, it's just a chain link fence.
Yes.
So fair enough.
That's what I'm saying. This isn't necessarily a problem in the book, but in the movie, it is like, okay, well, what are we doing here? But you're right, that because I looked up, that's 100% what it is. So I'd be interested to see if they do anything with that, or if it's just like, this is a cool looking thing.
Looks cool.
Looks cool. Yep.
Okay, so our winner this week in the listener polls was the movie, with 18 votes to the book's 9, plus 3 listeners who couldn't decide.
There you go, the movie. 1 listeners agreed with us, generally speaking, which is interesting. All right, thank you all very much for providing us all that lovely feedback on Divergent. Now, we're going to preview James and the Giant Peach by Roald Dahl.
From Walt Disney Pictures.
Up on James!
Comes the wildest.
Holy shipwreck!
Weirdest.
You enormous bugs!
Fascinating, isn't it? Most exciting motion picture adventure of the year.
He's gonna cut me in half! Let's get out of here!
James and the Giant Peach.
James and the Giant Peach is a children's novel written in 1961 by British author Roald Dahl, as you mentioned. Dahl dedicated the book to his 6-year-old daughter, Olivia, who died from complications of measles only a year after the book was published. That was before the vaccine. Aside from the film that we'll be discussing, James and the Giant Peach has also been adapted as a stage musical. It has been done as a puppet show, and there was a celebrity charity reading of it in 2020.
Like a COVID thing?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was wondering. I assumed that's what it was.
In 2023, the novel was part of a controversy.
Oh, that was
surrounding...
part of it. Oh, we get to talk about this.
Yes.
I didn't know we were ever going to get to talk about this.
Revisions of several of Roald Dahl's books. I was going to do this as a separate learning thing segment, but then I literally only had like 3 book notes, so I was like,
I don't think we've talked about this, have we?
No, I don't think we have.
I wonder if we agree.
I wonder if we do.
I bet we do, but
Let's find out.
Let's find out.
On February 19th, 2023, Puffin Books, which is an imprint of Penguin, announced that it would be altering the language used in many of Dahl's books to expurgate what they deemed derogatory words and passages, effectively rewriting portions of many of Dahl's children's novels, changing the language to in the publisher's words, quote, ensure that it can continue to be enjoyed by all today. Side note here, quick definition, expurgation, sometimes also called boulderization, is a form of censorship that involves purging anything deemed offensive from an artistic work or writing, media, etc. So Dahl's works have pretty much always received criticism for offensive elements, especially in regard to racism and anti-Semitism, as well as sexism and fat phobia. If you'd like to hear a more in-depth discussion of that, we covered it in our prequel episode to The Witches in 2021. So I'm not going to rehash all of it. But if you want to hear a little bit more about kind of the criticisms of his works and the elements that are often criticized, we did cover that more in depth in our prequel to The Witches. But in this particular case, the expurgation process done by Puffin Books was conducted by the use of sensitivity readers with multiple changes regarding Dahl's depiction of race, sex, and character. A report from the British newspaper The Telegraph determined that Puffin Books altered hundreds of passages in Dahl's work, including his most popular and well-known works like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Matilda, Fantastic Mr. Fox, The Witches, and James and the Giant Peach. In James and the Giant Peach, more than 70 changes were made to the text, such as removing references to Aunt Sponge as fat, changing queer to strange, removing references to skin color, such as his face was white with horror, looking white and thin, and the earthworm's lovely pink skin, as well as changing cloud men to cloud people. This process was met with sharp criticism from readers, from censorship watch groups, and from public figures, including many high-profile authors. In an interview with Newsnight, author Margaret Atwood said of the censorship, quote, "Good luck with Roald Dahl. You're just really going to have to replace the whole book if you want things to be nice." The backlash was so intense that on February 23rd, 4 days later, Puffin Books announced that Dahl's original publications would be released alongside the expurgated versions as the Roald Dahl Classic Collection, but it did not retract the revisions. Dahl's publishers in the United States, France, and the Netherlands announced that they had declined to incorporate the changes. So it was really mainly the British imprint that did this.
That's the end of your notes.
That is the end.
What
do
you
notes.
think about this?
I think this is the wrong approach.
Yes. Okay. Good. We agree. Yes. I figured we would agree on this, but I wasn't sure.
You know, I'm a white woman.
Yeah.
And I cannot speak to the kind of harm that is caused by racist depictions, anti-Semitism, etc. My opinion on it is
you can speak to it. You just can't speak to it from a place of
yes. I can't speak to it from a place of personal experience. Yeah. However, I have long held the belief that when you read any kind of work of media, really, it doesn't have to be a book. It could be a movie. It could be a TV show. It could be anything. You are not just consuming a piece of entertainment. You are also consuming a historical document. Yeah. You are consuming something that reflects the norms and the values of the time in which it was written and in which it was published. And I think that when especially older pieces of media contain elements that we find distasteful today, I think it is really, really important to have conversations about that and to be candid and to really dig into it and discuss it and pull it apart. Yeah. And I think that changing the media robs us of the opportunity to even do that.
Yes. No, I agree entirely with that. I think it's very dumb, this particular instance of it. I think, I do think it's maybe more complicated than some people that I've seen discussing it, that I saw discussing it back when this went down months ago. I think you can make an argument potentially that you may want in some situations, in some circumstances, to present a version of a story that is edited in some way for the audience you are presenting it to. So it's very context dependent. I guess what I'm thinking is, I could see the argument if you want to, and maybe the argument is you just don't teach these things. I don't know. Maybe you don't teach. So here, taking this away from this real quick, because it's a more concrete example. Adventures of Huckleberry Finn.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just say they release, which they probably have, a version that just does not have the N-word at all.
Mm-hmm.
Not a single, but everything else about the story is identical. It's literally just, we don't use that word in the book. It's just every time it's there, it's either replaced somehow or, whatever. But everything else about the book is the same. I don't know that I think that it would be bad necessarily to have that version in some contexts, in like classrooms and stuff. But it should only exist in context of acknowledging what the original was, probably. Yes. So I guess my point is, and maybe the argument is, maybe we just don't teach that book. Maybe we don't have because I read that book in 5th grade. We read an unedited, I don't remember what it was. I was young. We read an unedited, no, it was high school probably.
Yeah, I was going to say I read it in high school.
I think it was like high school. We read an unedited version of that book.
Yeah.
And I could see the argument for, and obviously we discussed it. We discussed the language used and all that stuff. And I think that's probably the best course. But I could also see the argument that maybe you still don't want, like, if you're in a context where there's a classroom with maybe a minority of black kids in that class, you don't want a whole bunch of people just reading the N-word out loud in class, or I don't know. I can see an argument for maybe.
I can see that argument. I also think if I were, I would never have my students read it out loud.
No, not obviously not read it. Okay, sorry. Maybe that wasn't the right. Maybe not read it out loud. But I could even see wanting to, because the book itself is very obviously anti-racist, at least to some extent, as much as maybe possible in, for 1800s or whenever Twain wrote it. And so I think there's valuable messages and stuff in the book, but I could see I could understand not wanting, for certain age ranges, not wanting let's maybe not have them have a book that has the N-word in it 800 times or whatever. But also, I don't necessarily know if I agree with that or not. But I guess I'm trying to make like the best case scenario for maybe editing something. But I also think that would be within, you would also do that. You would also say, were you to use that version, you would also go, oh, by the way, like you, as part of a class or something, you would say, the original version of this uses a slur that we do not use anymore. That is not an acceptable form or word to use, that blah, blah, blah. You would have a conversation about it. And then maybe you read a version that doesn't have the slur in it 800 times or whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe. In this instance, though, I think it's a little bit different. Primarily, I think because, you're just whitewashing.
Yeah. And
the material. Like, you're literally just pretending that the problems don't exist.
Yes, you're pretending that it's nicer than it is.
Yes.
And some of the examples, there's a bunch of examples on the Wikipedia page about this whole controversy, and some of them are fucking stupid.
Oh, yes. A lot of them are very dumb.
A lot of them are very stupid.
Very dumb. And it's also very clear that this was done in an attempt by the publishers to be able to keep selling these books.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's the other part of it is, like, what you should do. Like, I think what the obvious thing to do here is, if you're the publisher, is if you want to keep selling the books, or if you actually want to address the issues, you publish a foreword in the book that says, hey, a lot of stuff in this book sucks, is bad for these reasons. And then at the end, you publish maybe a little little workbook, or not workbook, something where it's like, hey,
a little breakdown of some sort.
Some of the different stuff. Some of the stuff you read was really terrible and bad. Here's why, maybe you do it at the beginning. Whatever. Yeah, you have like a little breakdown about some of the ways that the stuff in the book sucked or was bad, and you just educate based around that. But yeah, just removing it, it
robs us of the opportunity to educate, and to have that conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you layer on top of that that's a lot of the changes were just truly...
We're just like, who cares if the earthworm's skin is described as pink?
It literally does.
Who
Who
cares?
made that complaint? Yeah,
It's a worm.
Yeah,
it is pink.
Yes, it's very strange. It's very strange, and yeah, there's hesitant to say wokeness has gone too far, but in this instance,
but that's and then I think that's the thing that bothers me about some of the stupider examples here, though, is that it really does feel like you guys are just handing them ammunition.
It feels like somebody parodying
yes.
what they think like woke people, people who are actually care about progressive values want to do with media, which is just not the case. You're not helping anybody.
Yeah. That's the thing. This is helping literally no one.
The only person it's helping is the publisher trying to sell the book because they think that they won't be able to sell it if they leave the bad stuff in it because people won't want to buy it anymore because it's full of bad stuff. So they're like, what if we just get rid of the bad stuff? It's like, no. Roald Dahl said a lot of stupid, bad shit. You have to own that if you want to sell his books.
No, and I agree. Then that the stupid, bad shit that he said should stand.
Yes.
It's important that it stands. It's important that we know he said that shit.
Yeah.
And that he wasn't like a perfect dude.
Yeah. No, okay.
I don't know. I am always for discussing works within context.
Yeah.
Like you were talking about Huckleberry Finn earlier. If I were teaching Huckleberry Finn, I would teach it incredibly intensely and I would teach it within its historical context.
Yeah.
I think that's the way to do it.
And I think the other thing that's interesting, though, because we do often talk about is in the context of adaptations, which is what our whole show is about, there's actually an interesting layer to that of we often praise films for doing that editing.
True.
We often praise films for taking a story that has weird... We just did it with Divergent. There was a scene in Divergent where she specifically talks about how Janine, the villain's, has like carrying extra weight on her stomach and has stretch marks on her knees, and we're like, what is the villain has kind of overweight? Okay, well, this has nothing to do with anything, seemingly, again, barring the potential whatever, but we're literally just, the villain's fat, get it? Like that's what we're doing, and we were like, hey, it's nice that the movie didn't do that. But that is different because when you're adapting it, you can then that is the time.
Yes. You were taking that story and you were bringing it into a different context.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And it's a non-destructive process. You are not getting rid of the previous
you're
thing
not
it's based on.
Changing or putting different words into the mouth of someone else.
Yes. You're saying, hey, this is my version of this thing and I don't like this shit in it. Get that out of here.
Yeah.
And I think the publishers thought they were doing that, or whoever was behind these ideas with these books. I think they thought they were doing that.
I think they would be thought as being seen as doing that.
Fair. But it's very clearly, it's like, well, you didn't adapt this story. You just edited some stuff out of it without the input of the person who wrote the story. And you just it's not the same thing. Those are different things. And
I didn't see anything noteworthy while I was putting this little segment together about like how his family or like the Roald Dahl Foundation or anything. So I assume that they signed off on it.
They seem pretty down for getting paid. So
there was also a little note when I was looking into this on the Wikipedia page, and I didn't look into it further, so I don't know what's going on with it. That it also came out like a month later that they had also, not Puffin specifically, but the publisher of Goosebumps had also done this.
Really?
Without R.L. Stein's knowledge or permission. Ooh. And that, my friends, is a recipe for a lawsuit.
You're going to get your ass sued for sure. Absolutely. Because, obviously there's a whole different thing if that person, if R.L. Stein came back today and was like, hey, I didn't like that I used this language in this book here.
Yeah, let's go ahead and change it.
That's, sure, go for it. But you're altering the historical record in some capacity when you make those changes retroactively with somebody's work who's not there to sign off on it or recommend those changes themselves. And it's not good. Don't do that. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about James and the Giant Peach, the film.
The story of a daring explorer,
Where are we?
his extraordinary friends,
We're lost.
This is all your fault.
You blithering nitwit. Bite me.
Have you two gone mad?
and a bizarre world where anything can happen.
It's a giant shark!
What do we do?
Walt Disney Pictures and the director of The Nightmare Before Christmas invite you to go over the edge
Good heavens. He's committed pesticide.
and beyond your imagination.
Is it not beautiful? The place where dreams come true.
Wahoo!
James and the Giant Peach.
James and the Giant Peach is a 1996 movie directed by Henry Selick, who directed Coraline, The Nightmare Before Christmas, Monkey Bone, Wendell and Wild, among other things. But those are probably the things he's most known for. And this is our second time doing one of his films. We did Coraline, obviously, quite a few years ago. The film was written by Kerry Kirkpatrick, who wrote Smallfoot, Over the Hedge, The Spiderwick Chronicles, Chicken Run, and The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy film that we did. And co-written by Jonathan Roberts, who wrote The Lion King, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and Jack Frost, among a few other things. But those are the big ones. The film stars Paul Terry, Miriam Margolyes, Joanna Lumley, Peter Postlethwaite, Stephen Culp, Susan Turner Cray, Mike Starr, Simon Callow, Richard Dreyfuss, Jeff Bennett, Jane Leaves, Susan Sarandon, and David Thewlis. The film has a 91% on Rotten Tomatoes, a 78 on Metacritic, and a 6.7 out of 10 on IMDb, which is interesting. I'm surprised the IMDb score was that low. Not that that's super low, but it's lower than I guess I would have expected. And the film was nominated for 1 Oscar for Best Original Music. The score is by Randy Newman. The film made $37.7 million against a budget of $38 million. It was a pretty big flop.
I don't think I knew that.
Yeah, I didn't either. I thought I would have assumed it did fine, but no, it did not. And I believe the initial box office was lower. I don't know what that 37 is, but I was reading in a different part of the article that it's like initial box office run was like 28 million. So it was even less than that. That may include like a second run or something or some other sales or something, but yeah. So, getting into some production notes, Joe Ranft, who was a writer at Disney, he worked on A Bug's Life and Toy Story as a writer, among a ton of other things, but those are like 2 of his biggest projects that he was like a main script writer on. Tried to convince the studio to adapt this film, to adapt Roald Dahl's book in the early 80s, because he had read this story in 3rd grade, and he loved the liberating themes of it. But Disney turned it down because they thought it would be too expensive and too weird.
Oh, okay, Disney.
Yes. But then ultimately Disney would go on to acquire the rights to the book in 1992 when Felicity Dahl, who was Roald Dahl's widow and the executor of his estate, started selling off the rights to all of his stuff. That all happened apparently in 92 after he passed away. After they got the rights, they brought on Dennis Potter, who was a fairly prolific British TV writer. None of his stuff really screams I should write a children's book to me based on what I've seen. It was like procedural crime dramas and stuff on like BBC, it seemed like. But he was hired to write a first draft of the script, and Disney did not like this one because the tone was, quote, slightly black and bizarre.
I don't know. That sounds kind of perfect for a Roald Dahl.
This draft included the sharks being Nazis, apparently.
Interesting.
I don't know. This was the note I read. Later, Kirkpatrick and another writer named Bruce Joel Rubin were both brought on to write their own independent drafts of the script, with Kirkpatrick's being chosen as the version to move forward with. Prior to filming, Henry Selick, who was brought on to direct, and Disney apparently butted heads quite a bit over whether this film should be live action or stop motion. Disney wanted it to be live action. Selick wanted it to be stop motion. Ultimately, they landed on a hybrid approach.
They compromised.
Yes, in order to keep costs down, where the more fantastical elements in the middle are stop motion, and the beginning of the ending are live action, because live action is way cheaper to film than
That
stop
is
motion.
interesting, because I think that I've always thought that worked really well.
Yeah, in my memory, when I was thinking on this, I was like, oh, because I had forgot that. In my head, I guess it's been so long since I've seen it. I was like, oh, it's just a stop motion movie. But and then I remember, oh no, that's right. It is does open and close live action. And yeah, apparently that was more so like a cost saving thing than an actual like creative decision, supposedly. Again, from the handful of things I read. Getting into some fun facts that I thought were interesting. There's a puppet we see on one of the ships who is a captain, and it is the same head that was used for Jack in The Nightmare Before Christmas. There's even a moment where Centipede sees this captain character and says, "A skeleton?" And another fun fact, Jack in Nightmare Before Christmas was voiced by Chris Sarandon, maybe most known as Prince Humperdinck in Princess Bride. And in this movie, Miss Spider is voiced by his ex-wife, Susan Sarandon. There's a little weird connection there. And they were no longer married at this point. They were married for like 10 years in the 70s, I think. So she just kept his name, I guess, which is interesting.
I mean, the alliteration.
Yes.
You got to love that.
That's fair. So Paul Terry, who plays James, this is his only feature film role. He was in a couple TV shows that I saw. And more importantly, he was in a Lady Gaga music video.
Nice.
So there you go. But yeah, this is the only film he was in. Felicity Dahl does think that Roald Dahl would have liked this film, saying, quote, "He would have been delighted with what they did with James. It is a wonderful film," end quote. We will never know because he was dead at this point, but she seems to think he would like it. Based on his track record with every other adaptation, I seems highly unlikely, but you never know. Maybe this would have been the one.
This is a pretty good one.
I liked the movie. I don't know how it is as an adaptation, but I liked the movie as a child. All right, and then getting into some reviews. Owen Gleiberman of Entertainment Weekly gave the film a positive review, praising the animated portion, calling the live-action segments, though, crude. And then for the New York Times, Janet Maslin called the film, quote, "a technological marvel, arch and innovative with a daringly offbeat visual conception and a strenuously artful film with a macabre edge." So there you go. She was a fan. And Ebert was a fan. We're going to end with his. I had to go find, this was not included on Wikipedia. I had to go to his website and dig through and paraphrase his review here, which a lot of his reviews are just a brief summary of the movie, which is always very funny to me. It's interesting.
It's not how you write a review.
That's how Ebert wrote them. Ebert gave the film 3 out of 4 stars, saying, quote, "Almost all Disney animated films involve dead or absent parents whose departure frees their little heroes to become independent adventurers. But James and the Giant Peach wipes out the parents with so much glee, it almost seems like an inside joke." He would go on to say, "Stop motion is not a new technique, but what Selleck and Burton have done with it brings stop motion to a new plateau. The movements of their characters are so fluid compared with the slight jerkiness of older stop motion that I wonder if computers have been used to smooth out some of the motion. If not, then their achievement is even more amazing. All of the creatures, especially the colorful insects that share James's journey, are brought to vivid life, and the fact that we can see realistic textures like the cloth in some of the costumes gives the illusion an eerie quality halfway between reality and invention. As for the movie, based on a familiar children's book by Roald Dahl, it will, I think, entertain kids for whom stop-motion animation is the last thing they're thinking about." He goes on to summarize a few more events of the film before ending with, "Oh, and there are some songs." That's the last sentence of his review. 3 out of 4 stars. So.
Excellent.
Ebert.
Have you ever read this before?
No. I've seen the movie a bunch of times when I was a kid, but I remember very little about it. The thing I remember most is when he makes a lantern out of a potato chip bag, because I always thought that was so cool. I was like, you can do that? You kind of can, I think. But anyways, it's just like a one of those like Chinese lanterns or whatever, basically. Yeah. But I thought that was super cool. But that's about all I remember. Anyways, no, I have not read it. Or if I did, I read it when I was very young. And
I have read this book when I was a kid, very long time ago.
Yeah. No, I'm excited to read it, and I'm excited to watch it again and see how much of it comes crawling back out of the depths of my, I have a feeling a lot of it's just going to emerge from the depths of my psyche. I'm going to be like, oh, yep, remember that. Oh my God, that scene. Yeah, I just have a feeling that's going to be the experience of watching this movie. But we will see. That'll be in just a few weeks, or just a few weeks. It'll be next week. What am I talking about? Katie, where can people watch it?
Well, as always, you can check with your local library or a local video rental store if you still have one. We love for you to support your local establishments. Yep. But if not, you can stream this with a subscription on Disney Plus, or you can rent it for around $4 to $5 on YouTube, Vudu, Redbox, DirecTV, or Amazon.
There you go. Those are all the places you can watch it, and do that, and then come back. We're going to talk about it. It should be a lot of fun. Until that time, guys, gals, non-binary pals, everybody else,
keep reading books,
keep watching movies,
and keep being awesome.